There is a lie that has destroyed more dreams than failure itself. The lie that you need support to win. Perhaps no one has ever told you this directly, but most people have been trained to be emotionally dependent on the world. It depends on family approval, depending on encouragement from friends, relying on constant motivation to act, and when that support disappears, because it eventually does, the person collapses. But there is a small group of men who react differently. When they realize that no one is coming to save them, they wake up. It is at this moment that true power is born. Not the power of appearance, not the power of social media, but it's the kind of force that transforms an ordinary man into someone impossible to ignore. Machiavelli understood something that almost no one dares to admit. The world does not reward good intentions. The world rewards competence, psychological resilience, and the ability to keep moving forward when everything goes silent. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires you to abandon emotional fantasies and see the game as it really is. Because the truth is brutal. No one will fight your battles for you. No one is going to wake up early for you. No one will study for you. No one is going to build your discipline, your wealth, or your mind. And the sooner you accept this, the more dangerous you become. In this video, you will understand why solitude can be a strategic advantage, how to transform rejection into psychological fuel, why silence multiplies power, and how to build a mindset so strong that the world stops determining your worth. Because perhaps the problem was never about starting from scratch. Perhaps the problem was waiting for company during the war. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for someone to show up at the critical moment. Waiting for the perfect mentor, an understanding family, an influential friend, or a stroke of luck. But there comes a brutal moment in the life of any ambitious man when the mask falls. That's when he realizes that no one is coming to save him. And this moment often seems like a tragedy before it turns into power. Many call this depression, failure, or abandonment by destiny. But for the 1% who truly awaken, this acts as a silent baptism. A different, almost dangerous mentality is born there. Because when someone understands that they are alone, they also understand that they are finally free. Free from expectations, free from empty promises and the constant need for approval. Machiavelli said that decisions need to be based on real human nature, not on romantic ideals. And human nature reveals an uncomfortable truth. Almost everyone disappears when winter arrives. It's easy to support someone during the party. It's hard to stay when everything falls apart. That's why so many men break down emotionally when they discover that the world doesn't operate on the basis of justice, but a select few transform that shock into the beginning of their own inner development. The curious thing is that awakening rarely happens during quiet moments. It usually emerges after a rejection, a humiliation, or a phase where everything seems silently dead. The young man sends his resume and no one responds. He starts a business and nobody believes in it. He posts videos and gets a handful of views, while mediocre people go viral. This is where many people crave external validation. However, There is a difference between emotional support and psychological dependence. Those who constantly need encouragement from others hand over the steering wheel to the world, and the world's mood changes far too quickly. Today, they applaud you. Tomorrow, they'll pretend they never knew you. Therefore, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires emotional maturity. A strong man learns early on that motivation is fickle, but discipline is a weapon. He stops asking, "Who will help me?" and starts asking, "Who do I need to become?" This change may seem small, but it completely alters someone's destiny, because from that point on, the focus shifts from receiving strength to generating strength. Napoleon Hill said that wealth begins with a definitive decision. And perhaps the most important decision in life is to stop waiting for rescue. When someone understands this, the brain changes its posture. The energy previously used for complaining is now being used for building. The man begins to wake up feeling different. He reads more, observes more, speaks less, and stops wasting time trying to convince others. Books like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations or Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power are starting to make real sense. Because now he understands that the game was never emotional. It was strategic. The end justifies the means when the goal is to survive psychologically amidst one's own chaos. And that's where something that scares a lot of people comes in: constant adaptability. Man stops acting as a victim of circumstances and begins to act as their architect. Even when tired, he performs. Even though he feels insecure, he continues to move forward in silence. Because deep down, he realized something that few can endure without breaking. The same society that claimed to support perhaps taught them from an early age to depend on it. There is an extremely sophisticated lie that society repeats from childhood, the idea that no one can win alone. She looks beautiful, she looks human, she even looks morally correct. But in practice, this belief creates emotionally dependent people who never learn to walk without applause. The problem is that all emotional dependency comes with an invisible price to pay. Those who need too much support from others begin, without realizing it, to compromise their own authenticity. Change the way you speak, change your dreams, tone down your ambition so as not to bother anyone. And so begins an entire life built to fit into the comfort of others. Machiavelli understood something unsettling about human relationships. Support almost always comes with self-interest. Few people help because they believe in you. Most people help because it benefits them in some way as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just real human nature at work without makeup. That's why strong men learn early on to avoid being hated, but they also avoid becoming emotionally dependent on collective approval. Because the moment your emotions depend on others, your destiny also depends on them. Consider how many people abandon promising projects because no one in their family believed in them. How many talents died before they were born simply because the surrounding environment didn't validate their dreams quickly enough. The young man wants to start a business, but he hears that it's too risky. They want to create content, but people laugh at their first attempts. They want to study something big, but they say, there are better people out there. And slowly, almost without realizing it, he begins to see himself through the eyes of others. That's the real danger, because humans adapt to their environment faster than they realize. If you only associate with mediocre people, you begin to normalize mediocrity. If you live surrounded by pessimism, you turn prudence into cowardice. That's why strategic solitude is often worth more than emotionally tainted company. A man who reads alone for 2 hours a day grows more than someone surrounded by 10 negative people. Reading The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill, or studying biographies of entrepreneurs, strategists, and historical leaders changes one's perception of reality. Because he begins to notice a silent pattern. Almost every extraordinary man has gone through a period where nobody believed in him. And perhaps there is a very specific reason for that. Excessive support creates complacency. When everything is validated too early, the mind weakens, the pressure disappears, the sense of urgency diminishes, and the survival instinct falls asleep. But the man who understands that he is alone develops something rare: absolute responsibility. He stops blaming the government, his parents, his friends, luck, or the algorithm. He begins to act like someone who builds his own loyal armies within his own mind. And this completely changes the way he wakes up every day. He learns skills because he needs to. Learn sales because you need to. Learn communication because you need to. Learn English because you realize that the world rewards those who can cross borders. The pain of lacking support slowly begins to turn into intellectual fuel, and then something interesting happens. He stops seeking comfort and starts seeking competence. Because competence generates freedom, while dependence generates silent obedience. And when someone finally understands this, they begin to see advantage where before they only saw abandonment. Almost no one realizes this at first, but being alone can be an incredible advantage. The problem is that most people have been conditioned to see solitude as a social failure. If someone spends a lot of time isolated, people soon ask if they are depressed, lost, or strange. But there is a stark difference between abandonment and strategic isolation. Abandonment weakens. Conscious isolation erodes. Great strategists have always understood this. Before building empires, they built silence, because excessively noisy environments confuse the mind. Too many opinions create internal noise. Internal noise destroys focus. A man alone can hear his own thoughts without constant interference. They are able to recognize their own mistakes without needing to defend their ego in front of anyone. He can recalculate the route quickly, without emotional interference from third parties. Machiavelli understood that it is better to be feared than loved when it comes to leadership. But there is a prior layer. First, one must learn to lead oneself. And nobody learns that by living distracted all the time. Strategic isolation also reveals who is truly prepared to grow. Because the truth is that many people like the idea of success, but hate the silent process it requires. They want the spotlight, but they can't stand being backstage. They want results, but they don't tolerate repetition. They want money, but they run from the loneliness that precedes competence. But it is precisely during this invisible period that man is transformed. He starts working while no one is watching. He learns video editing on his own at 2 in the morning. He studies marketing while others are numbed by endless entertainment. He reads about investing, copywriting, strategy, and human behavior, while the entire group continues complaining about life on WhatsApp. And slowly, almost without realizing it, he begins to create a competitive advantage. Solitude offers something rare: time without interference. Time well spent is more powerful than empty networking, because a man who focuses for 2 years can break down limitations that distracted people carry for decades. There is another advantage that few people mention. On its own, it also filters out false allies. When someone doesn't yet have status, money, or influence, the masks quickly appear. Opportunists disappear. Curious people lose interest. The envious ones begin to mock, and that's excellent, because isolation acts as a silent detector of character. Those who stay by someone's side throughout the construction process tend to value it more than those who only arrive at the opening. Therefore, the appearance of virtue needs to be observed carefully. Many people seem loyal when everything is comfortable. But as soon as pressure arises, true human nature emerges. So man learns to protect energy, plans, and emotional access. He understands that not everyone deserves free access to their own mind, and while many see loneliness as punishment, he slowly begins to see it as preparation for something much greater. There's a phase in personal development that almost no one respects anymore: phantom phase. the period in which a man emotionally disappears from the world to build something in silence. No announcements, no validation, and no need to explain one's own actions. These days, people feel the urge to post everything before even finishing anything. They show goals, outline plans, and announce changes prematurely. And then they wonder why they lost energy along the way. The answer is simple. Talking too much drains energy. When someone expresses an ambition too early, the brain receives a false sense of accomplishment. It's as if part of the emotional reward has already been delivered before the real work begins. That's why so many men feel productive just by talking about productivity. Machiavelli understood the strategic value of silence. The calculated use of force includes knowing exactly when to appear and when to disappear completely. Because the man who speaks less, observes more, understands more, and reveals fewer vulnerabilities. The phantom phase isn't about social arrogance, it's about mental protection. When someone shares a fragile project too early, they expose something that hasn't yet taken root internally, and just two negative opinions are enough to contaminate one's own convictions. And sarcastic comment can kill a brilliant idea before it even matures. That's why intelligent men learn to build in absolute silence. The boy starts studying without telling anyone. Train your body without posting daily progress. Learn sales, programming, editing, traffic, or English without needing immediate applause. While the whole world is trying to seem important, he is trying to become important. This difference changes destinies, because those who constantly seek external validation become emotionally manipulable. Those who learn to work in the dark develop psychological resilience, and psychological resilience creates a competitive advantage in any area of life. Silence builds up internal pressure, and internal pressure, when properly channeled, becomes raw fuel for execution. There is something almost frightening about a man who learns to evolve without witnesses, because he stops depending emotionally on instant recognition. He understands that most people only respect results that are already achieved. Before that, almost no one sees the true potential. That's why he stops trying to convince others. Don't discuss dreams. It doesn't explain strategies. Don't seek approval at tables full of lost souls. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches us that the world responds more to results than to intentions. Then it goes into ghost mode. Get rid of distractions, decreased social presence, controls emotional access, and he begins to build such a strong version of himself that when he reappears, no one will understand exactly what happened. But before that silent return can happen, something inside him will still need to die first. There is a silent death that almost no man notices when he begins to mature. It's not physics, it's psychological. The death of the version that was still waiting to be chosen, protected, or rescued. Because as long as someone continues to wait for external care, they remain emotionally infantilized, and that hurts to accept. It hurts to realize that perhaps no one will recognize your effort. It hurts to understand that many people who swore to support you disappear precisely when you need them most. But there's an important detail. The pain isn't destroying the man, it's separating versions of him. One part dies so that another may finally be born. Machiavelli understood that power requires an emotional break with comfortable illusions. There is no psychological sovereignty without inner sacrifice, and the first sacrifice is almost always abandoning the expectation of being saved, because a man only becomes truly dangerous when he understands that he himself needs to fill all the empty spaces in his own life. That's where self-architecture begins. He realizes he needs to be a father figure when direction is lacking. The therapist himself when the mind is at war. the provider itself when the bills get tight, the mentor himself when no one else knows how to advise. And although this may seem cruel at first, there is an absurd strength hidden within it. Because the more responsibility someone takes for their own existence, the less emotionally vulnerable they become. The young man who used to complain about the past is now starting to study emotional intelligence. He reads Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl and realizes that suffering without meaning destroys, but suffering with purpose transforms. She starts therapy, organizes her routine, learns to control impulses, and creates small rituals for personal rebuilding. Tidy up the room, back to training, control your food intake, reduce digital distractions. Because he understands something fundamental. External environments often reflect the internal state of mind. However, this grieving process doesn't happen in a clean way. There are days when a man feels angry at the entire world. Days when loneliness feels overwhelming. There are days when he almost runs back to old patterns just to feel temporary emotional comfort. But then he realizes something dangerous. His older self was emotionally dependent. I needed approval to act. I needed support to continue. He needed validation to believe in himself. And this version would never be able to handle great responsibilities. Therefore, constant adaptability becomes essential. Humans learn to survive psychologically, even in hostile environments. Learn to keep working even without immediate recognition. And gradually, it begins to develop something rare, inner stability. But when this stability begins to emerge, emotions that were previously repressed finally begin to demand space. Most people try to run away from pain all the time. Distraction, entertainment, addictions, excessive socialization, uncontrolled consumption. Everything becomes an attempt to numb emotional discomfort, but strong men learn something that completely changes the game. Pain can be converted into energy. Anger can turn into discipline. Rejection can become the focus. Loneliness can turn into productivity. But this only happens when someone stops interpreting suffering as a sentence and begins to see it as raw material. Machiavelli understood that emotional weakness makes any man easily manipulated. Those who cannot control their own emotions end up being controlled by the emotions of others. Therefore, the calculated use of force begins within one's own mind. It's not about eliminating feelings, it's about guiding them strategically. Because repressed emotions explode, channeled emotions build silent empires. There is a curious pattern among highly competent men. Many of them began to produce absurdly well-rounded results after experiencing profound humiliation, abandonment, or rejection. The breakup turned into a gym session. Betrayal has become a business. Failure became an obsessive study. While some experience emotional collapse, others enter a state of rebuilding, and the difference lies in the conditioned response created by the mind. The average man feels pain and becomes paralyzed. The strategic man feels pain and produces. It teaches the brain itself to associate discomfort with movement. Rejected, work 2 more hours. Feeling anxious, go for a run, study or create. Feeling frustrated, use that as fuel to perform without needing motivation. It's almost like transforming suffering into psychological nuclear fuel. And the more he practices this, the more emotionally resilient he becomes. Of course, this doesn't mean romanticizing suffering. The idea is not to become a cold machine incapable of feeling. The idea is to stop wasting emotional energy on silent self-destruction, because misused pain becomes sabotage. But pain, when used wisely, leads to progress. The young man who spends nights studying while trying to reorganize his own life develops something that no amount of money can buy: emotional resilience. You're starting to realize that emotions don't have to control decisions. Politics, guided by reality, not by ideals, demands exactly that. Do it even when you don't want to. Keep going even when you're tired, to persist even without applause. And gradually a strange feeling emerges. What once destroyed us begins to strengthen us. Rejection doesn't break us as much anymore. Loneliness doesn't scare me as much anymore, because now there is another battle going on inside him, a battle against hidden parts of his own personality. There is a part of the human mind that society teaches us to hide from an early age. Aggressiveness, ambition, the desire to win. The pride of wanting more than average. From a young age, men learn that they need to appear good all the time. You need to tone down your own intensity in order to be socially accepted. And then he begins to repress everything that possesses brute force within him. But repressed energy doesn't disappear. It simply changes shape. It turns into anxiety, procrastination, insecurity, or passive anger. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the part of one's personality that someone rejects because they believe it is wrong. But the uncomfortable truth is that many men fail not because of a lack of potential, but because of a fear of their own power. Machiavelli understood something that few have the courage to admit aloud. The world does not reward naive innocence. It rewards competence, strategic thinking, and the ability to perform under pressure. That's why strong men learn to integrate their own shadow instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Aggression ceases to be destructive and becomes assertiveness. Pride ceases to be arrogance and becomes dignity. Ambition ceases to be a source of guilt and becomes a guiding principle. This process completely changes someone's attitude. The man stops apologizing because he wants to grow. Stop feeling guilty for wanting money, freedom, or power. Because he understands that emotional poverty is not a virtue, weakness is not humility, constant passivity is not kindness. It is often disguised fear. Better to be feared than loved may sound harsh, but there's a deep psychological layer to it. Respected men typically develop clear boundaries and a firm hand. They don't live begging for acceptance. The problem is that integrating the shadow is frightening, because it forces a man to see parts of himself that he has tried to hide his whole life. Envy, vanity, need for recognition, a desire to dominate spaces, intense competitiveness. But denying these emotions doesn't eliminate any of them. It simply allows them to take control unconsciously. So the strategic man does things differently. He observes these internal forces without excessive sentimentality. Channel ambition into construction. Channel aggression into discipline. Channel your pride into personal excellence. And slowly he begins to build something rare, real self-control. Because the most dangerous man is not the one who has lost control. It's the one who has learned exactly how to control his own strength. And when that happens, he realizes that freedom without discipline quickly turns into self-sabotage. The truth that almost no one accepts is simple. Freedom without structure destroys more lives than the lack of it. Many people dream of working without a boss, without set hours and without rules. But when he finally achieves that freedom, he falls apart. Because without discipline, the human mind seeks immediate comfort. And immediate comfort almost always leads to belated regret. That's why so many talented men remain mediocre, not for lack of intelligence, but due to an inability to maintain consistency when no one is watching. The strategic man understands early on that motivation is too fragile to carry great objectives. That's why he creates an ironclad protocol, a system rigid enough to protect him from his own emotional instability. Machiavelli knew that armies that are their own and loyal win wars because they obey structure, not mood. And it works the same way inside the human mind. Those who rely on willpower to act lose out to those who rely on routine. It all starts in the morning. The first negotiation of the day takes place even before coffee. Getting up when your body wants to stay lying down is a silent psychological battle. And those who lose this battle too early tend to lose several others throughout the day. That's why strong men create small rituals of mental dominance, waking up at the same time, make the bed immediately, avoid using your cell phone for the first few minutes of the day, train your body before consuming digital distractions. Read something that strengthens the mind, instead of feeding anxiety first thing in the morning. Books like Atomic Habits by James Clear help us understand how small, repeated actions shape entire identities. Then come the blocks of in-depth work. No notifications, no multitasking, without opening 5 tabs to avoid cognitive discomfort, just brutal focus on a single important task. But the ironclad protocol isn't just about productivity. It also requires an information diet. Because what someone consumes daily shapes that person's mental structure. A man who spends 4 hours absorbing negativity, gossip, and empty entertainment weakens his own perception of reality. Those who consume strategy, knowledge, and examples of excellence strengthen their minds without realizing it. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands constant vigilance over the mental environment. That's why the strategist reviews their day every night. Where you wasted time, where he sabotaged himself, where emotional impulse gave way. He doesn't do this to blame himself. It's used to recalibrate the steering, because dangerous men aren't perfect. They're adaptable. Constant adaptability transforms mistakes into quick adjustments, not emotional drama. And while many continue to waste energy trying to appear productive, he quietly begins to build something that naturally attracts attention without having to beg for it. There is a modern obsession that causes many people to lose years of their lives. The desperate race for contacts, events, coffee breaks, forced messages, strategic flattery, and empty networking disguised as ambition. People have learned to pursue proximity instead of building value, and this creates men who are dependent on social validation to grow. Machiavelli understood something fundamental about power. True influence does not arise from necessity. It arises from utility. Those who need too much access convey weakness. Those who develop competence naturally attract attention. That's why so many men spend years trying to meet the right people, without realizing they haven't yet become someone memorable. The world respects results much more than intentions, and politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands accepting this without emotional romanticism. No one is obligated to invest in someone who hasn't built anything solid yet. It may sound harsh, but this clarity saves years of naivete, because the focus shifts from chasing doors to becoming impossible to ignore. Observe the men who truly attract great opportunities. They were usually busy building while others were trying to appear connected. While many frequented such places simply to be seen, they were developing rare skills, learning sales, mastering communication, understanding human behavior, studying marketing, finance, technology, or any area that would increase market value. And then something inevitable began to happen. The right people came along naturally, because competence generates silent magnetism. An excellent editor receives proposals without having to beg for clients. A strong communicator attracts an audience without desperately chasing attention. A disciplined man commands respect without needing to announce it. Virtue and fortune go hand in hand when preparation meets opportunity, but almost no one wants to hear this, because building value requires time, repetition, and strategic isolation. This doesn't mean that relationships are useless. On the contrary, the right connections accelerate journeys dramatically. The problem is trying to create connections without having internal substance first. It's like asking for trust before developing competence. That's why the strategic man completely changes his approach. Instead of asking, "Who can help me?" he asks, "How can I become so good that my presence generates immediate value?" This mindset changes everything. He stops forcing artificial closeness. Stop begging for digital attention. Stop acting like someone desperate for recognition, and it begins to quietly build something solid enough to open doors naturally. Because the world may ignore promises, but it can hardly ignore excellence repeated long enough. And when that excellence finally starts to yield visible results, people from the past reappear as if they had always believed in him. There's a scene that almost every disciplined man witnesses after he starts winning. The return of those who were absent. People who disappeared during construction reappear just as the results begin to become visible. Those who doubted now say they always knew. Those who ignored it are now showing sudden curiosity. Those who once belittled dreams are now beginning to treat the man as if they had participated in the journey. And this moment is often emotionally dangerous, because the human mind longs to finally receive validation from those who previously denied its support. But strategic men understand something important. Late recognition doesn't erase early abandonment. Machiavelli understood that the appearance of virtue often masks social expediency. Many people don't approach others out of genuine admiration. It approaches this because results alter the perception of value, and those who don't understand this quickly end up opening themselves up to old, destructive relationships. The curious thing is that success reveals more about others than about you. While you were in the dark, many watched in silence, waiting for your failure to confirm their own internal limitations. Because seeing someone close to them succeed forces complacent people to confront their own mediocrity. It's more comfortable to disbelieve than to admit a lack of courage. That's why so many people laugh at projects in their early stages. That doesn't make sense. It's a psychological defense mechanism. But when the results come in, behavior changes quickly. Now they want advice, they want closeness, they want emotional involvement in what they silently criticized. But the man who crossed the desert alone no longer thinks the same way. He understands that not every reconciliation warrants automatic emotional access. The calculated use of force also means knowing how to manage distance intelligently. Not everything needs to turn into a confrontation. Often, polite indifference is the most powerful response. That's where many men go wrong. They confuse maturity with the unrestricted reopening of doors. They feel they need to prove their humility by accepting anyone back into their lives. But humility doesn't mean a lack of standards. Those who have suffered emotional consequences from blindly trusting learn to protect their own environment, not out of spite, for clarity. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that human patterns rarely change without profound effort. So the strategist maintains respect but limits access, a conversation without naivete, help without sacrificing yourself, listen without surrendering your own emotional core again. Because now he understands a brutal truth. Some people only like his presence when it validates their expectations. And when a man finally realizes this without hatred, without the need for revenge, and without a craving for approval, something much greater than success begins to blossom within him. After walking alone for a long time, the man begins to notice something strange. The loneliness that once seemed like punishment is slowly beginning to transform into peace. Not because he stopped feeling the human need for connection, but because he finally stopped depending on her emotionally to exist. And that difference changes everything. Most people live in a permanent state of psychological deprivation. They need to be validated, responded to, chosen, and constantly reminded that they have value. That's why they accept shallow relationships, toxic environments, and silent humiliations just to avoid being alone. But the man who has navigated his own emotional chaos discovers something rare: inner sovereignty. He realizes that the real asset was never the network of contacts, the status, or social approval. The asset has always been himself, their ability to adapt, his psychological resilience. His ability to keep moving forward even without immediate applause. Machiavelli understood that emotionally dependent men are easy to control. Those who fear losing companionship too much will accept almost any condition in order to remain accepted. And that's exactly how many people destroy their own identity without realizing it. Dreams are diminished in order to fit into groups. They hide their ambition so as not to intimidate insecure people. They tolerate disrespect to avoid social rejection, but sovereignty demands a high price, the courage to uphold one's own truth even when it generates external discomfort. A sovereign man does not need to constantly proclaim his strength. His presence naturally conveys stability. He no longer reacts impulsively to minor provocations. He no longer tries to convince everyone. He no longer feels a constant need to be understood. Because he learned something powerful during periods of silence. Not every battle is worth emotional energy. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean living in hostility. It means developing enough resilience to avoid being emotionally manipulated by the need for approval. And then the most interesting paradox of this journey occurs. The less desperate someone is for attention, the more respected they tend to become. Because emotionally stable people convey quiet security. They don't suffocate environments by constantly trying to prove their worth. The strategist learns to appreciate his own company, read slowly, train without needing to post. He works without announcing each move. Build emotional wealth before seeking material wealth. Virtue and fortune begin to work together when there is sufficient inner strength to support external growth. And although many still see this as loneliness, he knows it's no longer about absence, it's about emotional independence. The peace of knowing that whatever happens, he can rebuild his own life without begging anyone for ransom. But it is precisely at this point that an unexpected question arises within him. What to do with all this strength after it has finally been built? There is a silent effect that happens to men who actually go through this journey to the end. After building strength on their own, they begin to see other people differently. They no longer feel the need to compete all the time. They no longer need to prove their superiority in every conversation, because those who have had to survive emotionally without support develop a rare clarity about human suffering. He recognizes signs in the eyes of others that most people ignore. Insecurity hidden behind arrogance, fear disguised as irony, pain masked by constant distraction. And then the final paradox arises. Precisely those who have learned not to depend on anyone become capable of truly helping others. Not because of emotional neediness, not to be loved, but because you understand the impact that the right direction can have on the life of someone who is lost. Machiavelli understood that true leadership doesn't just come from power. It comes from the ability to deeply understand real human nature, but the strategist doesn't help just anyone, indiscriminately. This is important. He learned during his own journey that energy invested in undisciplined people usually turns into emotional waste. Therefore, he begins to observe specific signs, the spark in the eyes of someone who hasn't won yet but refuses to give up, the person who may be financially broke but continues studying even when tired, the young man who works all day and still finds the energy to learn a new skill at night, the girl that nobody takes seriously but who continues producing silently while everyone doubts her. These signs are of enormous value to those who have already weathered the chaos. Because he recognizes something familiar there, silent hunger, and silent hunger is often more powerful than raw talent. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that true potential appears more in consistency than in fine speeches. That's why wise men invest in attitude before investing in appearance. In the end, the man realizes that winning was never just about money, status, or recognition. All of this matters, of course. To ignore the importance of resources would be emotional naivete, but there is something beyond that. The ability to look back without feeling ashamed of one's own past cowardice. The ability to know that you endured phases where many would have given up. The ability to build a mind strong enough not to depend emotionally on the world's approval. And perhaps that is true sovereignty. Don't dominate people, mastering oneself. Virtue and fortune finally meet when inner competence and external opportunity begin to walk hand in hand. Ironically, the man who once suffered from a lack of support becomes exactly what he never found at the beginning of his journey. A firm presence, a lucid mentor, a vivid reminder that no one needs to be born powerful to build real power. Now the question is no longer whether anyone will believe you. The real question is, have you finally decided to believe in yourself? Because after everything you've heard here, one thing has become clear. The world doesn't give power to those who expect comfort. The world responds to those who endure the silent process of transformation. While most continue to seek approval, distraction, and emotional shortcuts, few men are building discipline, competence, and mental strength in the dark. And that's precisely why so few manage to get anywhere. Machiavelli understood that weak men live by reacting to their environment. Strong men create their own internal environment. They don't depend on motivation. They depend on the structure. They do not depend on constant support. They depend on absolute responsibility. And most importantly, they don't wait for the perfect moment to act. They act. And the moment begins to bend before them. So look honestly at your own life now. What part of you is still waiting to be saved? What excuse is still keeping your mind chained? Which old version of yourself needs to die so that the next one can finally be born? Because perhaps their biggest problem was never a lack of opportunity. Perhaps it was due to excessive emotional dependence. Most people will watch content like this, feel motivated for a few minutes, and then revert to their old habits. But a select few will use this pain as fuel. They're going to enter ghost mode. They will build in silence, and in a few years, nobody will understand where all that strength came from. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this video affected you the most? At what point in your life did you realize that no one was going to come and save you? Write it here in the comments, because sometimes a man awakens at the exact moment he decides to stop running from the truth. And if you want to continue learning about psychological power, discipline, strategy, Machiavelli, and building an unmanipulated mindset, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because from now on, you can no longer think small.